Hey cuties, Lady A3 here. Today we'll be looking at the Rubens 24 color full pan watercolor set. This is a student grade paint and it did come with a swatch card that seemed to be on watercolor paper, which is perfect. I didn't want to bore you, so we're going to speed right through that. There is a little loop on the bottom of the case so you can hold it in one hand and paint with the other. There is palette inside. Here's the first time I tried to use the paints. I don't want to spoil it, this is for next week's video, so you'll just have to wait and just see this little sneak peek. I know you can see some greens, but today what I'll be painting instead is a Bolivian ram, which is a kind of tropical fish. So I'm starting off with the sketch. This is on some Carson extra large watercolor paper, and it is quite large. I did a pretty loose sketch, which I kind of regret. I just wanted to pull this video together to give the paints a second shot and actually have something I could show you and kind of talk about with the paints. But I kept my sketch a little bit too loose, so there are some parts of it that I end up not liking so much. Primarily the dorsal fin, it's very straight and tall, and then some of the proportions are just a little bit off. But the sketch is nearly done. I'm just going in and adding the proper fin shape and making sure that gill is very defined, and then giving it a good erase before I tape down the paper and get going with the watercolor. So like I mentioned, these paints are student quality, which means they're not the most amazing watercolor paints, but they're better than like dollar store paints and Walmart paints, I'll say. This 24 piece set is $29.99 on Amazon, which is where I got it. And honestly, these are the only watercolors I've enjoyed using so far. I think I've only used fairly cheap watercolors in the past, so I wanted to get a more like mid-grade set, mid-grade quality set, so I can give it a fair try before I just write off watercolor forever. So we're starting with the kind of underpainting of the fish, and I am going to skip through a little bit, but I will say that the paints layer beautifully, as long as they're completely dry. If you go in with too wet of a brush on wet paint, you end up lifting the color a bit, which many consider a feature of watercolor paint. It's just not something I'm super familiar with, so I end up being alarmed initially instead of being like, oh, how nice it lifts. Instead I'm like, oh no, I'm messing it up. Though realistically I could just go in and layer on more paint. You just might get that kind of edge around where the paint's drying. I do every once in a while go in with the heat gun, just because I didn't want to sit and wait for the paint to dry completely. Overall, the Bolivian ram has this very warm yellow-orange undertone, which is why I started with that color. And it also has some really bright, like blue, green, and reddy pinks. So it's a beautiful fish. Fun fact, I am a fish keeper. I consider myself a fish nerd. I watch a lot of aquarium hobbyist YouTube and Instagram, and I have plans for quite a large nanofish community tank, which will include some Bolivian rams, at least that's the hope. Really, what I would prefer are German blue rams, but they're a lot less hardy and they need more specific parameters than their cousins, so to speak, the Bolivian ram. So thinking of that tank, I was inspired to draw this fish for you today. Though clearly it's not something I'm super experienced with. So, like I said, there are some issues. The body's a bit too short, and it's also a little thicker than I wanted it to be. So I did find that a little frustrating. So at this point, all of the watercolor is laid down, and I'm going in with these pearlescent inks that I opened in my first palette fill pack, which is the first video you'll see on my channel. And just anywhere that the fish has some iridescence, I'm adding little bits of the pearlescent paint, just to try to bring it more to life and try to cover up some mistakes. I also went in with these watercolor color pencils. Oh, it's a tongue twister. To add some texture on the fish because their scales have a lot of different tones on them. This actually works really well on top of watercolor because a lot of watercolor paper has some texture and tooth to it. So if you just lightly run the pencil across the paper, you catch just the topmost parts and you get a pretty interesting texture. It's not a smooth color, so that's fun. I also went in and cleaned up some of the distinct shapes and tried to do something to fix that dorsal fin. I did not accomplish fixing it, but I did give it a good try. Overall, I do really like these paints. The color payoff is incredible. They're so pigmented. They're very, very smooth. I didn't notice any chalkiness. They dry down great. Like I said, you can layer them on top of each other wonderfully. They're great and transparent. I didn't have any issues with them opaque or watered down. So I'd recommend them if you want to try some nice watercolor. I also went in with a white Posca to add some shine and reflections, highlights, try to give the fish more of a 3D lively appearance, as well as try to, make it look like it's actually underwater and a bit shiny and wet. I hope you enjoyed this quick view at these Paul Rubens watercolor paints, and thank you so much for watching. If you want to see more, follow me on any of my socials, subscribe to my YouTube, leave a like or comment. I will definitely reply to any and all comments. I appreciate the feedback and opinions. Let me know what you think of this painting. Let me know what you think of the paints if you've tried them. Are you interested in trying them? I am all ears. But again, thank you so much for joining. I hope you have a wonderful day and that you stay charming. Bye-bye!